I was thinking when I first met Paul and when we were at the Aquarius Festival, I thought 30 was old. Now I think 80 is old. And even then, that's up for negotiation. Which leads me a little bit into the subject that Paul asked me to talk about today, and that's death and dying in our community. And it might take a bit of a leap to put together a healing forum in death and dying, and I hope I can help make that bridge. And when I was contemplating this forum today, recently I have been invited to participate in a group of women at Nimbin who very selflessly have got together and realised that in response to a need in the community to create a group that can provide resources when somebody dies, whether they die suddenly or whether they're diagnosed with a terminal illness. And I was so thrilled to be invited to take part of this. It's a loose group of people in typical wonderful Nimbin style. There's no convener, there's no chair, we don't take minutes. It's very fluid, and the wonderful thing about it is when we meet every 3 weeks, all the things that we spoke about at the previous meeting have been actioned, and there are things to report. And one of the things that I've encouraged, because I actually live in Lismore and I don't live at Nimbin, but I admire Nimbin for the way that they can make things happen in what seemingly appears to be chaos sometimes, but as we know, in chaos there's order. And one of my suggestions is that we lobby for a morgue to be put in at the local Nimbin hospital. The thinking being that it is time, as we reclaimed birth, to be able to reclaim dying, to reclaim our own rituals. We don't need to give our most precious loved one's body to the hands of somebody else who's never met them, or to have them conduct their funeral. Some of the worst funerals I've ever been to are where people who didn't know the deceased speak about them. There's very few laws to do with funerals. There are a couple of laws to do with health, and apart from that, we can do everything ourselves. And as Nimbin is such a community, to actually have the body of your loved one taken off in the middle of the night to a morgue somewhere else just seems rather brutal to me. And so already that's one of the things that the group is doing. The other thing, we're producing a little booklet that will remind everyone what they can do, because when somebody close to you dies, often you're in shock, you're not thinking clearly, you're certainly not, looking up internet sites and reading small print. So this book will be a very accessible and easy booklet to help people to plan a funeral that is to their liking, that will reflect their loved one's life. And as a grief counsellor, I've believe and have noticed that to the best of our ability, it's not everyone is the same and not everyone wants to do this, but when people are allowed to have as much involvement after their loved one dies with the way that they're buried or cremated, the way the whole memory and celebration of their life and their death takes place, if we can do that in a way that is very satisfying to those left alive, that's the beginning of a healthy grieving process. And already in this area, the whole area around Mount Warning, Nimbin, the whole Northern Rivers area, We do lead the way in doing our own, what I call designer, home-designed funerals, and there's already good people in Lismore like Nisi who will do more than assist people in giving and developing a ritual and a ceremony for their loved ones. This happens rather quietly, but I'd really like to let everyone know that these things are possible, that we can reclaim our own rituals, and that it is part of healing our community. We don't have to give all our power to somebody else, let alone our loved one's body and the way they're handled and treated. That we can reclaim this and in fact inspire other people in other communities to do the same. And it has already started, and I'm particularly thrilled that Nimbin is possibly, it's very embryonic stage about the morgue, and maybe I'm speaking too soon, but already I've noticed that in Nimbin when somebody's diagnosed, a good group of people gather around, as happens in most of our communities, whether we're living in a city or an intentional community or just surrounded by our friends. This does happen a lot, and the more that it happens, the more people that we can inspire. Because death is certain, the time of death is uncertain, and often we don't think about it or prepare for it until it happens suddenly to us. So I would, while it can appear to be a depressing thing to think of doing, I would like to inspire people to make inquiries, to think about what sort of funerals they have, to think about if they were diagnosed with a life-threatening illness tomorrow, what they would like. There's advanced healthcare directives are very up at the moment, and everyone's talking about them as well. And paradoxically, while it appears that it could be depressing to go down this path and think about our death and plan our funeral, it's very liberating. Once you've taken care of that, you can forget about it. It's in place, you've had the conversation with your loved ones, and therefore you're able to embrace life in a greater way than having this sort of unlooked at fear. How am I going for time, Paul?
Whatever you like, yeah.
Okay. I'd just like to, it's very hard to see, as Peter was saying. Are there any questions? Yes.
What's the contact for Lismore?
Contacts? For
Lismore.
a funeral director? Sorry, for a funeral director?
No, just for the booklet.
Oh, look, it's just in the process of being finally edited, and it will be for sale at least by July. And I'm not sure where we'll distribute it, but if you keep your eye out for it, and it will definitely be available in Nimbin when it's produced.
Okay.
It's just a comment, Judy. I thought the hospital had all, so I found recently that St Vincent's and Lismore got rid of them all when they extended the nursing home.
Yes.
Eliminated.
Yes. Did everyone hear that? It was a comment that the St Vincent, most hospitals have a morgue. One would think, but the St Vincent's closed their morgue recently when they extended it for the old people's home.
So like you said, my mother's body had to be taken all the way to Ballot.
Yes,
No more.
yes. So it's sort of going in the other direction than what we need, or what would be desirable. And more there are private morgues in funeral directors, which of course then costs money, and therefore you're caught up in that system. Not that I have anything to do with, against funeral directors, but one thing most of us don't realise is that when we a funeral director takes the body of our loved one, that we don't have to buy their whole package. I think it's a very good idea that, you know, if the body needs to be stored, then they have the morgue. They're also very good at putting notices in newspapers. One thing you may not realise is that you can't put a death notice or a funeral notice in a newspaper unless you have a copy of the death certificate. So funeral directors are quite good at that, but we don't need to use the hearse, we don't need them to conduct the ceremony, we don't need them to organise the flowers, we don't need them to get a coffin from. There are other ways of getting coffins. We can build them, you can buy them privately. Just a little bit off the track, but one of the things I've noticed in my work is people now like to decorate the coffins, and it's very much a lovely part of the healing process of between the time when our loved one has died and the funeral, is to have a gathering of friends and loved ones to paint it or to put things on it or whatever we want to do. And often at that time the photo albums come out and the stories are told, and it is really a very lovely time for a sharing before the final ritual of the cremation or the burial. And so these are things that we can reclaim as a community. It in a way has been taken out of our hands because we often don't think about death and dying. When it happens, we're in shock and we're not thinking so clearly, and then things get a little bit out of control and we end up with, you know, a less than what we want ritual. So by thinking about it first and knowing the law, which is very few, that we can actually have a ritual that everyone feels satisfied with and that it is in keeping with our loved one's life. One small thing in Australia now, 80% of funeral parlours are owned by two big American corporations. And they buy local ones and keep the name. So often you'll think it's so-and-so brothers that our parents used or whatever. So these things, I mean, you can find out this information. And another thing, you can ring them up and ask them, are they locally owned? I've done seminars where I've talked about this, and some people sort of hits a spot with some people and they'll go home and they'll ring up all the funeral parlours in their area. I did a retreat for women with breast cancer once, and they got so inspired they went home and rang all the funeral parlours, found the costs of everything, how flexible they were. Some funeral parlours are not flexible at all, others will do just about anything that you ask them for. And they vary a lot in cost as well. So the more hands-on, it's cheaper, but more than that, it is us reclaiming our rights and our rituals.